the fucking time off. Apart from sustaining bad injuries, is everyone having fun? Time is it? In October. Right, I want you to all close off all your devices in front of you. Excellent. So we can have some old-fashioned discussion going on here this morning, but what I want you to do, I want you to answer me a question. I want you to do it in the groups who are sitting in around your tables, right? And the question is very simple. It's only 3 words. Okay. First word, what? Is anyone writing this down? Second word, is. Third word, play. What is play? I would like you to answer that question. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to answer, okay?
Very simple question. The reason
Sit at that table over there. I'm not forcing you to, it's just there is a whole thing going on.
What kind of thing? What the heck?
Well, I'll tell you. No looking it up either. Oh, discussing. Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Is it the right answer?
Yeah. But there is play in every activity. You know, play in every activity. There is play. And also play is considered.
Yeah, also you can play
Oh, yeah.
games, but you won't enjoy it. No, not all games.
So, like, yeah, there's like a component of play and everything seriously. In everything, like we play. Yes, it's children as they anything that you know events, things that accomplices. Risk or cost.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So that becomes
Whether it's a game or
we have it is that
go on, right?
anyone that is going to do something now. That's what I would say.
I think so. Do you remember what I was saying?
Really? Okay. Well, now you got an expert. Tiny game.
Well, you have to come up with an answer. No phones. No computers. Okay. Every table should have an answer. Starting over here.
Isn't playing like you're doing something but you're enjoying what you're doing, and it's like very not trivial, but it's not like super I don't know, I mean, it can be like mind creative and all that stuff, but it's not going to be something that's going to be too demanding, otherwise it's not going to be playing, it's going to be thinking. Was that wrong?
It could be right.
It's not telling me it's right or wrong, it could be.
It could be. Why the, what year are you guys in? Third. I'm glad one person was able to answer that question. Why is everyone still under the impression that there's a right and wrong answer to a question?
Usually is.
No, there isn't. If you've been paying attention, you will note that there fucking isn't the right and wrong answer to questions. There is no right and wrong answer to this question. This is why we're exploring it. Don't rush now. I'm on an hourly rate. I can fucking take my time.
We heard about the magic circles within the reading, like we learn about how it creates circles of like entertainment.
Creates a boundary.
Yeah.
Okay. This is the joy of doing the reading. You have informed answers to the questions. It's amazing what happens when you read stuff. It really is. It's mind-blowing. Creates a boundary.
And then the reading was on about like it's for all ages, like you do it without knowing, like playing you do without actually thinking about it.
What we would say is it's done without intention. That you usually have two kinds of potential action that you have, intentional and non-intentional, and that play is an unintentional or non-intentional action. It's not something that we deliberately set out to do very often, it is something that we instead fall into. Okay, good.
Oh, we just had it. Something about basically.
Fucking about.
At the fall of interactive entertainment.
What's that?
Interactive entertainment.
Interactive entertainment. There can be play through interactive entertainment, right? Okay. But not only through interactive entertainment, I hope. But it's an element. And would be relevant to this module.
We were talking more about like how it's it's in everyday life. It's not so much of a thing that's outside of everyday life as like all the other answers, but more embedded in anything we do, like in our construction of sound or performance or anything that's like all playing some part in our life.
It also has rules. It has risks.
Play has rules?
So, no, games have rules.
Ah, okay.
Play is like a behavior that we extract and then put in a game which is structured and has rules.
Really hard to type when everyone looks at me. you get that? Look, everyone's staring at you thinking, they're waiting for me to fuck up this. Usually I can do like 120 words a minute. I'm like, do we have anything more? No? Gentlemen, do you have anything to add? I do appreciate you came in late, so it's putting you on the spot somewhat.
Like, it's engaging.
I think that is an important point as well. Okay. What is play? Well, there's nothing particularly wrong here. I want to say that first of all. Interestingly, Alice has preempted one of the major points that I'm going to make today, is that play and games are actually not the same thing. There are some really, really interesting points here about how we think about play in contemporary theory. Play traditionally has been exactly as you said, Nick, that it was thought about as a banded activity. Traditionally, theorists of play, who have mostly come from sociology as a discipline, have thought of play as being separated from the other activities in everyday life. So, for example, work is over here, play is over here, and they do not mix with one another. That ideologically creates a function for play. One, you can say play is for kids, because when you get older, you've got to concentrate on this stuff, not that stuff. So you can kind of create a frame for play which says that play is not important, play is not something that adults engage with, grown-ups don't do play, etc., etc. That kind of thinking has gone out the window. It's still useful for us to an extent, and especially when actually we're thinking about digital games, it does create a useful way of thinking about how we get blocked off from the rest of the world if we're playing games which aren't online, for example. How you can create that sort of focus and immersion in a game which blocks off everything around you. That's a fairly useful heuristic for thinking about it. We, as Nicky said, we call it the magic circle. This comes from one of the classic theories of play by Johan Huizinga in 1938, which I'll talk about shortly. But these points at the bottom here, the play is embedded, that it's a behaviour that we can do, and that it engages in particular ways, are much more important today. Those are theoretically far more important points that we have about play as it exists today. Play isn't something, I feel, which is separated from the world in the way that Huizinga and in particular Galois, who I'll talk about as well, thought of play back in the 30s, 40s and 50s. Instead, play has actually become one of the dominant ways that we engage with the world as an entity today. And that means that digital games have become really important because they provide models for how we actually have that playful engagement with things. So, I mean, it's interesting to me the way we use it in language. We're often told that we need to play the game. Have you ever heard this phrase? It's all about playing the game. It's a favourite phrase of managers and senior management at Swansea University. It's like, Leighton, you're okay at what you do, like you win awards and shit, but you need to play the game. It's like, fuck you, I don't want to play your fucking game. I want to play Grand Theft Auto 5. I don't want to play your gay-ass game when I have to suck out to people. That's not me. So, that idea that play has become a fundamental part of everyday life is actually something which has emerged fairly recently, I would argue. This is a 90s, 2000s phenomena where we describe play and the emergence of games as a way of engaging with the world. There is a specific term for it, which I'll talk about at the end of the lecture, which is called gamification. Is anyone familiar with this word? Or ever heard of it before? How many of you are doing a journalism degree? Just one? Good. It's that degree. But journalism is a classic example of what I would call the gamification of media. Journalists historically have been able to produce journalistic materials in order to fulfill a set of criteria. And that criteria might have been set by the ownership. We're familiar with the political economy of media, mass media in particular, right? But it also may have been fulfilled by a desire and a need on the part of journalists to hold political power to account, right? Which we call the concept of the fourth estate, right? And actually, we should all be familiar with this. That's not what journalists do anymore, unfortunately. I feel really sorry for journalists today. I've got limited sympathy because I did a traineeship as a journalist and I realised this was the way it was going 20 years ago. But I do feel sorry for journalists in one sense, in that their job has become gamified. Now, journalists, the key thing is not whether they find something interesting or whether they hold power to account. It's actually how their metrics. And that is what we call a gamification of something. It transforms the artwork of creating newsworthy articles in newspapers into a game where you compare who's going to click on this and how many clicks can you get, how much spread can this get, how many people are going to repost this on social media, and how much traction is it going to get that way. By metricizing it, you turn it into a giant game where you are competing with other people for the high score, effectively. The most of that you can get. that is deeply problematic, but it points to two things. It points to, one, the power of gamification, but two, also how play has become a way of engagement. We play with the media itself. We repost it, we do this as well. It's a playful attitude towards it, and that idea of a playful attitude is really important. Okay, I'm going to carry this going, because I like the creativity that's going on here. And I'm not usually one to say that. But this is going to be packed, fuck's sake. Very quickly, what is a game? Same principle, have a chat. I'm going to give you just a minute or so to do this, come up with some quick ideas. With the caveat that it's not the same as play.
Something like do you want to play a game? But it's the game is like life or death. Yeah. So which point? I don't know. Life is a game. It could be something that you have to interact with. Nah, because I think it's a game is something with winner and loser. You can be a winner and a loser.
Ben, what are you going on there for?
But then you play like Stardew Valley. Yeah.
There's
nothing. Then maybe that's not a game.
That looks like a been shoved in a
That's a
dust.
lifestyle.
Terrible.
No, but surely you can lose with Stardew. You can buy. Yeah, that's not the yeah. But you can buy, so like.
You can make a game of that.
Because like.
Yeah.
It's like a wager.
All the dust in every parking spot. People are pitched.
Okay, that's enough time, because I obviously have a whole thing to get through here, so I can't spend too long on this. Very, very quickly, starting here. What is a game?
I said maybe something with winners and losers.
Winners and losers. That is a very good point, and it's something which we will come to next week more than this week. But the idea of winners and losers in a game creates a structural hierarchy in a game. So some people win, some people lose. Not all games, I suppose, need to have winners and losers, but it's certainly the case that most do.
As I was saying, it's a structured environment that has specific rules. But it also can have rules that you don't necessarily need to respect entirely.
Is that a fair way of saying that?
Uh,
You can bend the rules,
yeah.
you can twist them. This is why people never ever have, in the history of humankind, no one has ever finished a game of Monopoly. Right? Because nobody plays by the rules, and inevitably I end up picking the board up and slinging the fucking thing across the table, because it's just not going to happen. Guys.
Yeah, there's clear rules and boundaries and sort of objectives. I think there's more of an objective to a game rather than playing.
And I think the thing about the objectives, you might disagree with me, Connor, but I think the one thing about objectives which is important, is that they are set out before the game is played. That when you approach a game, not only are there objectives to the game and to winning or losing it, for one, but also the player has objectives as well. Very often, we set out with objectives. This is interesting in the context of digital games in particular, because especially in contemporary digital games, it's impossible to play through an entire game in one sitting very often. If you've got a 35 to 40 hour video game, unless you're a psycho, you're not going to play through the entire thing in one sitting, right? So you have, when I approach something like that, I have an objective that I want to do this, this and this in like the 2 hours that I've blocked off to play something that evening. Because that's all the time I have. I want to finish this bit. And that's my objective for that. And that contributes then to a wider set of objectives that I have, that I do want to get to the end of the game and do this at some point. But I have to break it down into smaller objectives. And games, digital games in particular, scaffold that really well for us. I know you said last week you play a lot of Red Dead Redemption 2. The whole idea of missions in Red Dead Redemption 2 is to take the overall objective, which takes roughly in that game, somewhere between 50 and 70 hours, but break it into bites, where the objectives can be made smaller in order for you to progress to that, and then you feel that you're making progress through the game state as well. Do we have anything to add?
I was going to say achievements, but it kind of goes under objectives, doesn't it?
I think they can be different. It's a good point. Because, like I was saying, objectives can be set before, but achievements can be something given to you through the course of playing a game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and very often you can get achievements that you didn't set out to get in objectives. So one of the interesting things that people do with trophies in games, you're fucking around and doing something, all of a sudden you've got a trophy. You think, oh, sweet. But you didn't realise that you were playing for that objective in any way, shape or form. So achievements of that can be really, really interesting. And there's some games which are very random in terms of outcome and don't rely on a skill level, where achievements can be, you've all played Snap, right? The card game. That's just weird. You guys don't know card games, do you?
I know Snap.
Depends on the cultures and where you come from.
But I think a wider culture as well, Alice, that younger people, we did this with a research project over the summer with some school kids out in Pembrokeshire. One of the lecturers involved in it was from history. So we can get them to play with cards. I was like, I don't think that's a very good idea. It's not just because I wasn't going on about gambling or anything like that. He's like, they won't know what they mean. He's like, yeah, they will. And it turned out they didn't. They didn't have a clue what cards meant. We had to tell them, this is a king, this is a queen, this is a jack, this is an ace. They didn't get it. Snap's a really simple game, right? You put cards down, and if there's a 2 there, and you put a 2 down, you just bang your hand on the table and say snap, and then take all the cards with you. The one who's got the whole pile at the end wins the game. That doesn't involve any skill. It's completely randomised, right? But you still get achievements from it. Yeah, so you can have an objective to win it, and you get an achievement for it, but you're not putting anything into it. So achievements can vary a lot, I think. Do we have anything to add, guys?
I think everything was said.
Yeah?
Finite and infinite?
Can be either, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to add that point. Yeah. Games can have a temporal aspect to them. Well, they always have a temporal aspect to them, I should say that, right? But that temporal aspect can be very short. It can be long, it could never end. You could have a game that goes on, in theory, forever, I guess. I don't know. I kind of wander off board at some point and fuck this is not what I want to do with my life. But but that's just me. That's one of the glories of having attention deficit disorder. That happens to me in like meetings after 10 minutes. It's like, I can't be fucked with this and go on. So these are all interesting points. Right. I recognise that we've done nearly half an hour here on fuck all, yeah. It is very important to separate games and play out, okay? But to also recognise that they are two deeply interlinked concepts at the same time. So definition of play and a definition of games must necessarily be different from one another, but we also need to do the weird juggling act here of recognising that when we talk about a game, we are playing it. So these two things interact very, very closely from one another. Now, if you do want just a really quick shorthand that I've come up with, play is a concept, a game is a materialization of that concept. That's the difference between them. Play is conceptual, it doesn't exist in a concrete fashion. But then we can describe ourselves as being playful or playing something. It's also important to note not all games are play. We don't play every game, and also not all play is game-based. Play can be without the structure of a game around it. I guess for the purposes of what we need to do in this module, and in particular what I'd like you to explore in your first assignment, is that we're interested in the intersection of play and digital games. Because remember, what I'm asking you to do in the assignment is a let's play video, and really that's to discuss your play practices, how you play and what you play and why you play and what is the manner of your play and how is that done. Right? And necessarily I'm asking you to do that through the lens of you're engaging with a particular game. Okay? So this can actually be really tricky, and I'm very guilty, and I will try my best not to do this right now, but I'm extremely guilty of using these terms interchangeably. So if I do that, you can pick me up on it, okay? But I will try my best to keep the language as straightforward as possible here, but I will often say, I'll confuse play and game just naturally. I think that's something we do in our natural use of language anyway. You know, it's something that we've become accustomed to doing. As long as we're clear on when you're using it in anything academic, the play is the conceptual aspect of this, the game is the material aspect. And then even that's interesting, because games don't always have to be material themselves. You can play a game which doesn't involve anything physical as well. So it's all a conceptual crapshoot, and we're excited to be part of it, right? Why are you not moving? Yeah. Now, the conventional understanding from these classical theorists is, like I said earlier, play has always been considered separate from everyday life. You are here now as students to do a serious job of listening to this boring son of a bitch for 2 hours, witter on about something and whatever, right? This is not a playful environment. This is not a place of entertainment, people. And I don't give a shit how much money you've spent. This is not somewhere where you should be enjoying yourselves. You should be here. In fact, I want us to get rid of these seats and have really like rickety old wooden benches with like splinters and shit, because that would reinforce that this is not a playful environment, right? Traditionally, that would fall more in line with what Johan Huizinga thought about play. Huizinga, play is famously contained in what he termed the magic circle, which is what you were talking about, Nick. And this part of the reading for this week conceptualizes, I think, some of the criticisms of that. It's a little old, that article now, it's 2006, but it's a very good critique of that concept of the magic circle. Magic circle is the classic theory of play. And do you know what strikes me as weird as well? Why are we doing this in year 3? Shouldn't we be doing this in the first year? This is really important shit about media, right? I'll give you an example why, before I actually do some proper teaching. I read a book over the summer by a games theorist called Miguel Sickert. One of his books is in the reading pile, and I'll put the new one in there as well. I'll remember to do that this afternoon. This book was called Playing Software. And Sickert's got a really interesting part of this book where he talks about AI, and he's talking about ChatGPT in particular, but I think you can apply it to any number of AI. And his point is, at the moment, we're not using ChatGPT as a production tool. What we're using it is a toy. We play around with it. We see what we can do with it. We literally are in a playful mode with ChatGPT. And it seems to me that's how we approach all media. We mess around with them. We play around with it. When you get TikTok, first of all, I mean, everyone's had TikTok for a while now, so it's hard to put yourself back in that position, but it's a playful engagement with it. You try to find things which are funny. You try to find things which are entertaining. You don't use it in any kind of serious manner. Same as we approach most things like this. When you first get your phone, it's fun. It's a game to be played. It's something that we engage with in this way. A playful mode of engagement, right? That's really Sickert's point in that entire book. That as software has proliferated the entire world, we become more playful with it because the way we engage with software is to play around with it rather than to play by the rules with it. That's not the concept of play as it was traditionally. And when you encounter play in any academic work, you're going to see this, and this is still taken, I guess, kind of seriously. It stresses that the play of any given game must occur within a spatially and temporally enclosed area, or playground, as the concept that Huizinga uses, and is such detached from ordinary life. Play and the ordinary world exist in different temporal and spatial realms. Play is a bounded thing. When Huizinga's writing this, he's thinking of places like playgrounds, like literal physical playgrounds. You know, here is a space that has been made for you to play in. The rest of the world, you don't mess around in, you don't play in. It's over there. He's thinking of schools where you have specific areas for play and you have specific areas for learning. This was a dominant idea really throughout the 20th century. The key thing that has changed everything with regards to play is this, the idea of mobile digital technology. Rather than digital games per se, because you can remember until up to, you know, turn of the 90s, I guess, when the Game Boy emerged as a console in 1989. But even then, the Game Boy is a bit limited in terms of what it can do. Prior to that, digital video game play was concentrated either in the home or very specific locales called video game arcades. So here, the arcade is a classic example of what Huizinga's talking about as a bounded space for playing. Here's a place where you literally have to go in there and you can't take the stuff out of. And when you leave there, you're not playing on those things anymore. But the mobilization of media in this way has transformed this to a certain extent. So I don't want to throw out this totally, but I want to recognize that there are different modes of play now, and play has become far more proliferated in everyday life. But the classic quote is, play is distinct from ordinary life both as to locality and duration. For Huizinga, play had different temporality. It operated in a different time scale, and we felt that time differently. The time spent playing feels different to us than the time spent working or studying. It's a different quality of doing things. And therefore, you know, we experience this with boredom, right? When you're bored shitless, time feels so much longer. Huizinga's making the same point here. He actually points to the thing that time goes faster when you're in a playful state. Time goes quick when you're enjoying yourself, right? The criticisms, which are largely crystallized in that article I've asked you to read, is that Huizinga's idea of play is a classical interpretation which is very, very ideological in its roots. Huizinga is a sociologist, and as a sociologist of this particular kind, what he's doing is making distinct, playful activities from work and labour, which is seen as the most important thing that we can do. This is an attitude born of the Protestant work ethic in Europe from the 19th and 20th century. This is the most important thing. You can play, but only after you've done 8 hours. My point is that games are not discrete in the way that Huizinga claims. In fact, games have become a key structural element of how we do things in everyday life. I don't blame Huizinga for, it's not fair to say got it wrong. He couldn't have foreseen how digital media would transform how we live our lives, basically. There's no way of doing it. But this notion of play as being separate is very, very outdated, I would say. And now play has become a dominant way of thinking about how we actually engage with the world. In terms of how play and games intersect, we can look at how games have been defined, and we see a repeat of some of Huizinga's points. So Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman, their book is one of the most important game studies book ever written. It's again in your reading pile if you want to have a look at it. I've just taken this quote from them. As a player steps in and out of a game, he or she is crossing the boundary or frame that defines the game in time and space. So they're taking Huizinga's notion of play as being separate and applying it to games as well. And they're writing specifically about digital games here. Again, note the date, 2004. What's happened since then with digital games? Something really important.
iPhone?
That's come along since, so that is an extremely important point. Mobile gaming has become a major market for one. There's another thing as well. Multiplayer online, yeah, hugely. Which existed when they were doing this, but existed in a real nascent state. It was very early on, you know, at this point.
EverQuest and stuff like that, pretty early on.
Yeah, and Dreamcast would be the first console to bring that in '99 as well. But if anyone, before your time, I doubt anyone in this room has actually played a Sega Dreamcast, but it was incredibly slow to actually do that because it was on a 56k modem. You were there for like a week trying to get the damn thing to connect. So, for Salen and Zimmerman, they observed games in the same way that Huizinga observes play, that it is a separate and distinct thing. But again, it's when they were writing it. The reason why I put it here is because I still think there's some value in that definition. It depends on how we want to play the game. Sometimes we can approach playing a game as this ourselves, that we do want to cross a boundary between the world is here and the game is here. We want it to be a discrete and private sort of space. That largely describes how I play. I don't do online play anymore because simply I haven't got the time for it. And I am sick to death of like 10-year-old Malaysian kids beating the shit out of me on FIFA. Because the problem with it is this, right? Do you know if it was like a kid down the street, I could like go down there, knock on their door and then beat the crap out of them, especially if they're only 10. That's going to be a piece of piss, like, you know, I can really hurt them as well. But when they're in like Kuala Lumpur, I can't get a flight to fucking, and especially when they start bad-mouthing me, and then I get blocked all the time and get banned because I say things which probably shouldn't be said to children. But it's a whole thing, right? So now I tend to play offline so I don't get abused by infants from across the world. Instead, I enjoy my game space as a separation from the crippling stress that I experience at work. Yeah. It depends on how I want to do this. This can still be the way that it is done. Some of us prefer to play in an online environment, and therefore I don't think that idea of crossing the boundary towards something in that way works in the same way, although we are still deciding to engage with a game, which is different to perhaps what we do in everyday life. So it's still useful, this, definitely. What we need to notice is perhaps not as stringent as Salen and Zimmerman thought in 2004. This is definitely something which is made by other game scholars. And Roger Caillois is a French sociologist, classic game scholar. His proposition, play is essentially a separate occupation, carefully isolated from the rest of life, and generally is engaged with precise limits of time and place. Almost word for word, same kind of thing that Huizinga was saying 20 years beforehand. I mean, that's pretty much it. What Caillois does, which is useful to us, is also define what the qualities of games are. 4 essential qualities of games: performed voluntarily, uncertain, unproductive, consists of make-believe. Now, and he uses the classical Greek terms for them, which I've listed underneath. I wouldn't expect you to use that. I have problems with every one of these. Performed voluntarily. I don't think games are always performed voluntarily. I think sometimes we're coerced into playing games. I think sometimes there are games which we are forced to play. You think of games used in an educational context, for example. I don't want to do this, but I've got to do it anyway. Uncertain. The outcome of some games can be very certain. Unproductive is the weird one for me. Are games unproductive? I don't think they are. I think we learn skills, we get knowledge, and we get outcomes which are extremely productive. But this speaks to a classic sort of sociological definition of games and play as being something which is not worthwhile in us engaging in. What we should be doing instead is working really hard. Don't play games, study. You'd get better grades if you studied. Well, yeah. I get better grades if I gave a shit. I'm not going to do that either. Do you know what I mean? So it's again, we get this kind of Protestant work ethic bullshit with this sociological approach. And consists of make-believe speaks to the time in which this was written in. Because games can very often now reflect a lot of things which are close to everyday life. However, Calwa is still influential in this kind of thing. I don't really know why, but he is. And I think, okay, so you tell me all this stuff, like, you know, then you're trashing it. What's the point to you? Well, feel free to trash it in your videos too. When you think about definitions of games, this is what I'm talking about in terms of doing a critical let's play. You can look at this in your practices of play and so how you actually play it in a way which means it's not a game in the classical definition for you. These are definitions of playing games which I prefer. So this is Gregory Bateson. If we think of play as a form of communication, then we start to move away from the classical definitions of what play and games are. Bateson says that play is a form of meta-communication. In that, when we communicate in games, we are communicating about the nature of communication itself. We are learning about how to communicate. We are learning about the models of communication we have in everyday life. We're learning about how to relate to other people in effective ways. Again, talking about play as if it's a cooperative thing, which, you know, not all play needs to be cooperative. Some play can be solo. However, I think these points are very, very interesting. The play provides us with models of how we communicate and how we socialise. And therefore, Bateson's work has become extremely influential in the field of education. Is there anyone in here who is interested in becoming a primary school teacher? It's usually one. You know, I couldn't do it, to be honest. I fucking hate kids. But you know, we can do it. I have a great deal of respect for primary school teachers because that looks like a really fucking hard job to me. Primary school teachers, when they do their education degree, be it a BA in education or a PGC in primary ed, they are given Bateson's model about play as a way of designing play activities. That play is there to socialise young children into communicating with one another. And getting children to engage in play is easier than getting them to engage in what I did earlier, which is giving a round table discussion with communication in that way. If you have effective play strategies for children at a very young age, they will learn models of communication and socialisation to go forwards, which will make them more cooperative with other people. So why primary school, it's very, very important that kids have structured play environment in order to learn how to play with and therefore communicate with other kids. One of the criticisms of the British education system at the moment is that there's too little of that in primary school. You know, they're testing kids and making sure they can read and write at the age of 6 and all this sort of stuff, and it takes away from what the people like Bateson saw as very important about that age, which is learning how to be with other people in effective ways so they can become communicative members of society. And within that, what Bateson argued was that play allows us to learn things like body language, tone of voice, expression, which you wouldn't get from things like reading. So you actually learn the nuances of communication through play in a way that you can't do things. So for Bateson, the manner of how we play is critical to how we become effective human beings afterwards. So it's all about mannerism. This builds on George Herbert Mead's ideas about role training, that play. Mead was an anthropologist who looked at societies in the South Pacific before the Second World War, and made lots of observations about how children played in those societies. What he observed mostly was that play in these, if like, less technologically inflected societies was all about roles and learning roles for the future. And embedded within that was how you communicate within those roles as well, and how that's effectively done in the future. So Bateson argues that play isn't about breaking off from the world, it's about learning the world. It's a way of learning how to be in the world as opposed to being apart from it. But the most effective ones that I think there are, the way we think about play today, are these guys. Thomas Malaby, an Australian academic. Play does not describe a distinct human activity, but a mode of experience, a way of engaging with the world. And personally, I think this is the most effective way of thinking about play. That play isn't an activity itself, it is a way of doing an activity. It is a manner of doing things. It's a way of approaching stuff. We approach things in a playful manner. We have a playful attitude towards things. That describes how we do, not what we do. This builds on Gernot Boehm's idea of the affective atmosphere, the lived experience and perceptual awareness and emotional attunements that determine how and what we know about place. What Malaby is suggesting here is that this affective atmosphere and the emotional attunements about how we know about things can be playful. We can approach things in a playful manner. And therefore play becomes an atmosphere by which we can understand the world. And we can have playful atmospheres. And indeed, you've been in playful atmospheres. Since the 1990s, I would argue that the education system in general has tried to make things more playful, to try and make things more like a game. You've been through the education system now for what, best part of 20 years? It's been fun, hasn't it? Yeah, because it's all a game, it's all fun, you know, great, isn't it? Shit. Certainly university has taken this on board. University has taken this on board in a big way. That, you know, everything should be fun and playful. Isn't everyone having a great, look at fucking Nick's face. Isn't everyone having a great time? Play characterizes an atmosphere that we have. And there is a generalized sort of, certainly in the 21st century, that this is like a playful sort of atmosphere and playful environment, playful society. Fundamentally created by the proliferation of digital media, I would argue. So, any questions? This is quite deep. Play is an atmosphere. Play is a way of understanding how we engage and engaging with the world. We engage with things playfully. We mess around with them. To borrow, you know, Aidan's very well articulated point at the beginning, we fuck around with it. And then we find out. Okay. So just to change tack slightly, I'm going to do this slide and then we'll have a break for 10 minutes. Right? Games. What do games actually need? They require time. It doesn't have to be fixed time. You can decide that a game lasts forever. But there is a time limit on games. Very structured games, such as sports, have a very distinct time limit on them. The 90-minute football match, the 80-minute rugby match, the 5 days. Who the fuck? What were they smoking when they come up with cricket? 5 days. We're going to have 5 days and we're going to have 2 meals a day during the cricket match. We're going to have lunch and tea. It's like, it's my kind of fucking game. Like, you know? What are we having for tea, boss? Games have rules. These rules can be very strict and very formalized, like chess, for example. Or they can be much looser, but a game has a set of rules. In digital games, those rules are often not given to us. Those rules are instead encoded in the programming of the game, and we are sent out to learn what those rules are by playing it. Games affect moods. They have a distinct effect upon us. A game can be boring, almost as boring as this lecture is right now. Not quite. Games can make us feel happy. They can make us feel sad. They can make us feel angry. That's my key one with games. Do you know how many PlayStation 5 controllers I've broken in the last, what, less than 3 years since I've had that damn machine? 8. They're 50 fucking quid a go. 8. Son of a bitch. And I'm on like Gumtree and eBay and everything, looking for second-hand ones all the time, because I know I'm just going to break this one. But then, because then you learn, the suckers on Gumtree who were selling them to me, and I'm the biggest sucker of them all, they've broken them by fucking slinging it as well. So, bastards. They affect behaviour. They change me, a usually mild and quite placid individual, into a frothing, raging maniac at times. But also can affect, you know, positive behavioural change in me as well. Sometimes I learn. I'm a better person for whipping some kid 8-1 in FIFA. Yeah. Most importantly, games affect the outside world. Now this is the point that Zynga and Co. never made. Because they put this boundary around play, and you know, Calwar going forward will put it around games, and that would be copied, and indeed Salen and Zimmerman would make much the same point. They don't accept one fundamental thing which I think is very important about games, and which other theorists have developed, which I'll get onto. Games actually affect the world outside of the game as well. They are not constrained in the way that people once thought. We can think of this in very, very simple ways. Does anyone know what a paratext is? You might be familiar with the word parasocial. Yeah, does anyone know what a parasocial relationship is? This is when like people think that they have some kind of relationship with an influencer or so on social media, right? That you believe that you have some kind of connection with that person. And indeed, you actually do. It doesn't matter that that person doesn't have a connection back to you. That emotive and effective way that you think about people means that you do have a meaningful relationship, even if it's not reciprocated. That's why we call it parasocial. It's not social in itself, where there would be a social connection. It's a parasocial relationship. It sits aside from social relationships, but it is meaningful. Paratexts work in the same way. They are not the texts themselves, they are the texts about texts. Yeah? So a paratext could be, for example, a documentary on a film. That's not the film itself, but it is, you know, a text about that film. Now, the paratextual industry of video games is vast. It's colossal. Does anyone in this room at this moment in time have a piece of video game merchandise on them? I would find it very difficult to believe that everyone's doing a third-year module on video games and has nothing about video games.
Something small.
Something small, large, don't matter. What's that? Superb. Here we go. Your favourite character. I got that beat. I got a wallet. I could pull up my trouser and show you my Sonic the Hedgehog tattoo on my leg, but these trousers are not great for doing that, and I'm not taking them off. That would be instant fucking sacking offence, and it's being recorded on video as well. So that's a whole thing that I'm not prepared to get into at this point in time. Paratexts of that nature are an illustration that games go beyond the boundaries of games. You can see it in the wider video game industry. We just sort of two Sonic things. What did you make of the Sonic the Hedgehog film? Mario's. What did you make of the Mario film? You liked the Mario film. It sucked. But we have two separate relationships to a paratext about video games, right? Now, I'm labouring the point with paratext, but the point is that the games do not stay within the bounded region of the game itself. We talk about games. There's an entire culture around games. That culture can actually be quite toxic. Try being a woman on Xbox Live and see what I mean. That could be quite toxic. Yeah, very toxic, right? One of my master students, Cheska, did her part of her undergraduate dissertation on this. You know, and it's like, holy shit. Cheska, how on earth do you even continue playing this fucking stuff? The stuff that people say to it is unbelievable. There's culture around games. And therefore, games escape from the bounded area. They affect the outside world. And it literally affects me in very direct ways. You know, if I'm playing a game and I've done really well for a couple of hours, I'm actually happy. I know you might find that remarkable that I actually experience happiness as a human being, but I do, and I will go forth from my abode, very often down to the pub in Uplands, and will actually be a sociable presence. So when me and Merrin go for a pint, he actually enjoys the experience instead of me sitting there calling everyone a prick. It only takes me about half an hour to go back to calling everyone a prick, but that's usually because I have to wait ages at the bar. Games have a distinct effect on us as people. Okay? That's not something which is traditionally covered in the classical definition of games and play. The context games are played in is therefore critical. That means if the context is important, there is no magic circle, there is no special realm created. It's the wider context in which we play in that becomes important. And I think that's very important for one, how we play, and two, what the results of play are. Let's finish this up. We have a 5-minute break and then we will finish. If anyone needs to go, you can leave, change module, anything you need to do. Does anyone know, has anyone dropped off this module? Harvey, fuck for that. I don't know, no, I'm only joking, but I don't know sure why Abs was taking